Welcome to the Comic Watchers Show. I'm your host, Matt Meyer. With me, as always, is Nicholas Osborne, subbing in this week for Tardy Farty Michael Eakins, a.k.a. Scoop Johnson, who had to go to comb his beard out or something, is Professor Cody White, and former host and show founder and all-around wise individual. Cody, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, fellas. This is a big one.
This is a big one. It's so big. We had to go live with this episode on a special night because everybody's talking about Justice League, the Snyder Cut. Holy cow, it's here. But first, before you get our sage assessments, good, bad, and ugly, Nicholas is going to jump in and hook us up with some news. Nick, what do we have this week?
Definitely. I'll wing my way through this since old Scoop isn't here to walk us through the news as usual. But there are some cool things that happened before we dig into our 4-hour special of the Snyder Cut. No, I'm just kidding. I think there are some things that are worth covering. And for me, the biggest news was Berserker. We all knew it was coming. It was the most predictable move ever, but Netflix has already scooped up the rights. They have a first deal look with Boom Studios. So they're coming with a live-action film for Berserker and following up with an anime series. And they've got Keanu Reeves attached to both voice the character B, as they've come to call him, short for Berserker, I'm assuming, in the anime series. And also he'll play him in the live-action, of course. And there are a lot of thoughts on this because it had a massive Kickstarter, over $1.4 million, sold 600,000 copies at issue 1. And it was kind of a preordained thing that it was a comics to TV or movie pitch. And that's where a lot of the discussion is. But either way, this is an exciting announcement that I think is good for the industry. More along the big two news, we've got Zatanna from DC Comics. They actually are working on the live action film still, if you can believe it. And they've tapped the promising young woman director, Emerald Fennell, who's going to be coming in to write and help develop that movie. And I think it's a good announcement, a good time for it. And I'm excited to see what they do. And not to be outdone in usual Big Two fashion, Marvel also dropped some news about a Hawkeye spinoff series that is potentially in development featuring Echo. And for those who might not be familiar, Echo is a deaf character, has the ability of photographic kinesics to perfectly mirror any action and fighting style she witnesses, and portrayed by deaf Native American actress Alekwa Cox. So some pretty cool stuff happening. You know, all that's coming to Disney Plus along with all their other characters. They got She-Hulk, Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, and Loki's coming up, and we're finally getting to sink our teeth into Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I'm sure is coming up on this show. I know we're all hyped about it. Maybe. Now, we might find the time for that. I mean, maybe we won't have to do a 4-hour special like this, but it'll be worth it. And not too much else, really. We've got some good first looks, and if I could take a moment to promote one of our writers here at Comic Watch is working on a series of articles that is essentially a book examining the new X-Men run with Grant Morrison a lot attached. Travis Hedgecock, who writes Patricia Highsmash column for us. And part 2 just dropped today. And it's something that I really hope everybody can check out because Travis was gracious enough to let us serialize this book where it's coming in chapters. And when I say book, I mean that because there is a lot of research. It's extensive, and it's for a fan looking for a truly in-depth analysis. And even for someone like me who's not as familiar with the new X-Men run, it is incredible to read. There's a lot of insight there, and I really hope people check it out because it's one of the most exciting articles I've seen from Comic Watch here in quite a while, and it's really worth your time. But I don't want to take too much time. I'm already 5 minutes in. And last time I did this in like 20 minutes because there's always so much comic news. But I want to talk about the Snyder Cut. So let's dig into it.
Comes ye now the doom of man, or possibly its salvation. It's the Snyder Cut, and it's here. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know the story behind this thing. Of course, personal tragedy brought director Zack Snyder away from the original Justice League. Joss Whedon was brought in after roughly 60-ish% of the movie was filmed to finish it. These two directors have incredibly polar opposite styles. The result was something of a Frankenstein's monster movie of mishmash that collectively everybody said meh about. So the fans all kind of got together. They all started mythologizing this idea of a mythical Snyder Cut, some finished product that was sitting in Warner Brothers vaults. He had gotten shafted. The fans so angry. And finally Warner Brothers was like, you know what? We're going to kind of we're going to make this thing happen. We've got this new streaming service, HBO Max, coming out, and that was weird. This is the perfect way to get people jumping on board. So, this past Thursday, the 18th, the 4-hour and 2-minute official Snyder Cut of the Justice League was released. Now, suffice to say, Zack Snyder's track record with DC properties has been extremely polarizing. I think that, and I hope Cody's coming back. I don't know what just happened, but I think that at least between Nicholas and there's Cody. That was weird, buddy. Welcome back. I think that between the three of us, we are kind of all going to be able to give voice to a lot of different perspectives on this without necessarily falling, directly on one side or another, because it's important that people's perspectives, just because they're different, aren't getting shat on just for being different. So I think it would be best to start with what we thought worked about this thing. So Nick, why don't you had the most favorable opinion of it overall. Why don't you go ahead and start with what you think worked?
Yes. Okay. I think the most important thing to start off with is most people who have been on social media at any time after the Joss Whedon release of Justice League knows the movie is essentially a joke. Lots of memes of Superman's messed up CGI jaw where they had to leave his mustache. Crazy jokes like Flash falling into Wonder Woman's boobs. Weird stuff that happened that kind of made the only thing people talked about the film was joking about how bad it was. And I think the most important thing that I took away from the Snyder Cut is it turned that joke of a movie into something that is serious and that is watchable and that is a good movie. And that was a huge improvement on what we actually saw in Joss Whedon's take of it. And there's a lot to unpack between this because it's sort of unprecedented, right? I mean, how many times have we had this theatrical release from what is essentially a different creative team who came in halfway through, and then a few years later, you get to go back to the original creative team and see what they would have done to it. And then you put millions of... you inject millions of dollars into that comparison scenario. And we as fans get to just jump back and forth and see, okay, this is what Joss Whedon did with this footage, and now this is what Zack Snyder did with the footage. And the end result is, to me, abundantly clear. I was able to watch both Joss Whedon's and Zack Snyder's cut pretty much back to back, and that was a sitting. But it helped to highlight some of the more significant and important details that Zack Snyder brought to this vision of the DC universe. And we're going to get into this a lot because it's the DC universe that a lot of comic fans aren't really that hyped for, because it's pretty dark, it's violent, and it brings a side of these characters that you really don't see all that often. And it might feel like it's more out of the Injustice League or the Injustice comics. And I think that's kind of an important distinction. And I'm glad that you touched on that, like, just to get this discussion started, because this is just something this is one person's vision of it. That doesn't mean that what you feel about these characters is wrong or that it should never be like this, but it is something that's different. And that's where a lot of the discussion is, and it's totally valuable to have that input. But I love this vision of the DC universe and what Snyder has done with it. I thought the Batman v Superman unrated edition, which is a whole other mess of a scenario that we had to get through, was a good film. And I like that they were able to finish this trilogy and do something new with it. But it's important to consider the context and what happened to get this movie, because if you don't have that trauma, the tragic incident of Zack Snyder's daughter committing suicide and forcing him to step away along with Deborah Snyder, you don't get this movie. If this creative team stays on this movie and they put it out to theaters, you don't get the Snyder cut that we had now. They're not going to put a 4-hour movie in theaters. And I think that it's an important thing to see that Joss Whedon was operating under such strict Warner Bros. Parameters and just butchered the movie, in my opinion. But you don't get this Snyder cut with all these different scenarios leading up to it. And that's what helps set this apart as an unprecedented moment. And I think that it's important for not just fandom in general, but kind of what comic book movies are. That this is something that is going to have a lot of people talking for a long time. And it's found its way in history. And I'm just glad that it's a positive take on it, because it is a good movie. There are arguable things in it, but the best thing I think about it is we got to see this vision fulfilled in its entirety in a way that we could have never done before. And it's a vision that is coherent and consistent and fits with what Zack Snyder has done with the DC universe so far. And all the complaints aside, because there are plenty of them to be made, it's not a perfect movie, but it's good and it's enjoyable and it's something that is actually worth watching. And I can't say the same for Joss's.
Cody, why don't you go ahead with what you liked about it? Your positives.
Okay, I can do this. It caught me off guard a little bit. Like, there's some things that Nick said that I want to respond to, but I'll wait and respond to those when we get around to kind of talking about the negative. I wanted to preface this with the fact that, so when I was watching for the first, at least a little bit more than half of the movie, I was watching with my friend Lucas. We were going back and forth between the cuts so we could compare the scenes as they occurred, or at least near it, because they changed the order of a lot of things. And I had promised him that I would watch the whole movie with him like that. But sober Cody makes promises. The drunk Cody can't keep up. So, Lucas, when you eventually listen to this, I do want to apologize that I did binge the last hour and 50 minutes of the movie with Bailey instead of you. That being said, so the takeaways that we pulled specifically out of the first 2 hours of the film, because I feel like that is a major turning point for me with the way the narrative is structured. There were scenes that I felt like Snyder did better. The first scene with Aquaman, right up until they started with the chanting music, I thought was a far better delivered scene. But the scene between Aquaman and Bruce, right? Like that major iconic, like, will you come with us? No, I'm stronger alone. That's not what that saying means. Blah, 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 whatever. Like that scene was so much better. But then on the flip side, we go back to the Wonder Woman scene. And I felt like the Wonder Woman scene in the Whedon cut was far better than the Snyder cut. So there were individual moments where I felt like the Snyder cut had recut things in ways that were more dramatic, were more coherent, obviously that looked better. I think it's interesting. I don't know that I necessarily think it's good or bad that he started with a dumb show on this one. Like in the Snyder cut, he starts with the recap of everything that has come on, but there's things in there that didn't happen before that didn't quite fit in. But I like the idea of a dumb show. I don't know if this was necessarily a very good dumb show, but I like the idea of it. The effects, like, you can't argue that Steppenwolf didn't look better. He still looked dumb, but he certainly looked better. Like, there's no doubt about that. I mean, there were here and there bits and pieces. The fleshing out of Cyborg's past, while I think that they went too far, like some of those scenes could have been done in half the time. Like, it just wasn't adding anything narratively. After a point, it was just like, okay. But I think the additional fleshing out of that character was really important. I wish that they had named Iris in that scene with Barry rather than just having her be there and be a damsel in distress. Like, I don't think that's necessarily better to include her than cut her. But if they were on the border of doing something good there, so I mean that's a thing. Ryan Choi, I really enjoyed. Like, I would like to see a Ryan Choi movie directed by somebody else. But I thought he played the role really well in the limited amount of time he got. That's my positive takeaways. I'm sorry. I know I'm more negative than positive. I like them.
Okay. It's important that we have a balance of perspectives. So it's not just all like fawning praise or bitching.
I'm glad you brought up those points.
Yeah. Like, for me, this is going to sound like a contradiction in terms, but because there's scenes in it that really feel unnecessarily stretched out, or moments of scenes. But having said that, for a 4-hour movie, I mean, it's relatively easy to sit through. I can't take that away. The pacing, again, except for those moments in there, and we'll get to those when we kind of hash out the more negative aspects of it. Despite them, like, I didn't necessarily feel like it was a chore to sit through a 4-hour movie, you know? And it's tonally consistent. And Nick, you mentioned that, and that's so, so important. Now, I definitely lament the loss of Aquaman going, yeah, but because that just cracks me up every time I think about it. It's so stupid, but it's so funny. And that's probably why I like it. But
R.I.P. Aquaman sounds.
But I mean, from start to finish, this is obviously the work of one director, one vision. Now, having said that, I think it's interesting to parse out a little bit that this is a Snyder Cut, but it's not the Snyder Cut in the sense that this is definitely not the movie we would have gotten in theaters. We wouldn't, maybe I'm sure they could have made a 3-hour version theatrical, and then this would have been the special director's cut on Blu-ray or whatever. But just as an aside, there's no way that this film, as it is now, would have been released theatrically. And that's fine. I mean, that's why director's cuts exist, is because that's the director's intended vision for whatever movie. So good for Zack Snyder, in that after the unimaginable tragedy that he endured that took him away from this, that he was able to get the chance to finish his movie. I mean, good on him for that. And, for the record, I'm very sure that Zack Snyder is aware that there are plenty of people that don't like his style, and he's not willing to cater to those people. He still is going to do what he's going to do. And I mean, even if I don't like the style, I got to respect that, he has a particular vision of DC and those characters that I do not subscribe to, but he definitely stuck to his guns with it. And that's for what it's worth anyway. He didn't cater to people online bitching at him or, wagging their finger like Cody and I are about to, that he got it wrong and this and that. So, I mean, and like you're saying, the extended stuff with Cyborg really helped flush him out a lot. Steppenwolf did look better. I actually really liked that scaly effect where with his armor where it's constantly rippling and in motion. That's kind of cool, actually. I like Jeremy Irons as Alfred. I really wish they gave him more to do. I really like J.K. Simmons as Commissioner Gordon. I really wish he had more to do, especially since he got strangely jacked for the role and then he wore, an overcoat the whole time. But, and honestly, the casting, with the exception of Ezra Miller, is all good. Or at least fine. I don't love Ben Affleck as Batman and Bruce Wayne, but I don't have anything against it. You know, he's fine. He does the role. That said, I definitely feel like you were saying, Nick, that Snyder really wanted to make an Injustice movie. And, you know, in a sequel that's probably not ever going to happen, maybe that's probably what he was going to be leading up to. We'll likely never know. But, you know, like he got to finish his trilogy on his terms eventually. Fans got their voices heard. Sometimes those voices got really toxic, and that's not okay. And, but at the same time, it does show that when you get loud enough, whether it's about Sonic the Hedgehog looking wrong or wanting a director to be able to complete his vision for a particular movie, there is some flexibility starting to show in these corporate suits. And of course, it doesn't hurt that, you know, they got a $70 million advertising campaign for HBO Max out of it, but neither here nor there. So
it's true. And before we move on to the negatives, I do want to follow up a little bit on what Cody said, because he touched on it some, but I want to include this in our positive discussion because it isn't something that should come up in the discussion of negativity, because it is a positive thing that we got a lot more character development, involvement, screen time of characters like Iris, of Ryan Choi, a significant improvement on Cyborg, all these people, these actors of color who brought something into the role that Joss Whedon got rid of. And it's a positive thing that we got to see a lot more of these characters. There are some complaints like Iris not getting named and things like that, but it's a really, really great thing that we're able to get these characters and have that involvement in this movie, because it helps to substantiate it in a way that we really didn't see before in the theatrical cut. And also part of that involvement, which is a totally separate discussion, ties into the role of Ben Affleck as Batman, and we finally get to see this version of Batman come up against this DC universe version of Joker with Jared Leto. It was the first time the characters interacted, and despite Cody's eye roll, the scene was really cool because Jared Leto does a cool Joker. And I think it was one of the moments that I was looking forward to most, and spoiler alert, they saved it to the friggin' end. And I was so excited to watch the movie, and I was 3 hours in, I'm like, okay, where's the Joker? But
they didn't use the "we live in a society" line, which means there is another Snyder cut out there, and all of our memes are worthless.
And it's coming, and we're going to talk about that, and it's a positive because the Justice is Gray edition is coming, and it's going to have different footage. And I've seen some rumors going around that it has the "we live in a society" line. A lot of those scenes from the Joker were ad-libbed, and I think there were 4 or 5 takes that went in different directions, and Snyder needed the one where Batman came out on top. So that's why you have the, you know, "and I will fucking kill you" line, because he needed Batman to come out on top. But there are some that maybe the Joker had a bit more of a dominant role in that discussion, and I think that's the one where the "we live in a society" line came from. But it was cool. It was a rewarding moment to go through almost like a decade of this development and all these different movies of having the extended or the DC Universe edition of these movies come out and have Batman and Joker interact with one another. And I think that was something Snyder purposely did, because it's kind of a letdown if you go through all of this and you don't have at least one moment of these characters interacting. And it's grim dark for sure, because it's in the nightmare scene, and it's like doubled down on the version that a lot of people probably don't like of these characters. So it's more divisive than anything else in the movie, I think. But I was a fan. I liked it.
I agree with that, but we'll get there in a minute. So, Cody, what were your negatives on the Snyder Cut?
Well, the story's just not good. The bottom line of the story, the 2 hours to bring a team together and then 2 hours to have them beat one big bad. It's not good. It's not well paced. It's just not a good story. The big bad that you have is not the big bad that you want. The big bad that you want comes in and replaces the big bad that you had in a previous scene for a hot second and gives you hope, and then they just, nah, not for us, not for you. You don't get this. I hate all the nightmare stuff. I think it's stupid. It just doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. It doesn't jive with it. I also hate Jared Leto. Like, not Jared Leto as Joker, like Jared Leto as a person. I hate his face. Take it culty weirdness somewhere else. Hard pass for me. Everything. Campaign against Jordan Catalano. I don't like him. Sorry. The nightmare stuff just felt gratuitous. It felt like it was, and to coin a term, it was so masturbatory. It's ridiculous. Like, the only thing to do this is to show how cool I am, and he did it. You did it, Zach. Good for you. Other things that I hate was that even when, like, there's all this talk on set of the hostile work environment that Johns and Whedon presented, all of the cutting room casualties of people of color, and when we finally see the full vision of it in 4 hours, he called Crispus Allen Crispus once, so that was a moment of dialogue that but I mean, the rest, it was already so soft, it was already so poorly done, that when Whedon cuts it, it doesn't make any effect on the actual story, which is crappy. Like, that's not good. If you start with such a sand-based foundation, like where you can only go down the rabbit hole. The slow-mo got to me. The fight scene gets to me. Barry catching a hot dog and sticking it in his pocket. Like, you guys want to talk about all the goofy shit in Joss Whedon's cut? Yeah. This motherfucker has Barry break his shoes because somebody dropped a cheeseburger. Somebody dropped a cheeseburger, so Barry breaks his shoes to go rescue the damsel in distress, catches a hot dog in midair, looks at it, spends way too long staring at Iris, like that was creepy. Takes the hot dog, puts it in his pocket, and gives it to the dogs. Like, that is Whedon level camp. That was goofy. I don't care what you say about consistent tone. There are 3 or 4 points in that film that slide right into the same kind of goofiness. And some of them, I wish I could remember the scene where I looked at my buddy and he looked at me and we said, I bet this won't be in the Snyder Cut. And then it was. And we were both just like, God damn it. Almost had it. You were right there. But you just couldn't quite get over the hump. I mean, I felt like there are equal things that I like and dislike, but the things I dislike are far greater. This man doesn't understand Superman, and there's no amount of argument that can sway me to believe that he does. We have 80 years of Superman comics to lean back on, plus 5 other theatrical films that he had nothing to do with that portray an incredibly different Superman than the one he gave us. Like, I miss a Clark Kent that's quick with a smile. Give me a Clark Kent that pulls a cat out of a tree. I'm sorry, but I fucking want it. I want it. I want Christopher Reeves back. I don't like this Superman. He's not recognizable as Superman to me. He feels like closer to the Homelander than he does to Superman for me. And it's not cool. No, you can't get behind it. I will never get behind it. This is not my Superman. I dig pretty much everybody else. I can even get over the hump with Ezra Miller as Flash if I just remind myself, like, okay, it's Flash, but it's Bart. It's really Bart. And that's, as long as I say that to myself every 15 minutes or so, like, I get it. He's Barry, but he's Bart. Cool. Got it. Like Gal Gadot, she's not a very good actress, but she's fine in the role. She does what she's asked, which is not very much. Maybe we should talk
Wonder Woman is really underwritten in this movie. Like, yeah. She's just there.
Yeah, she's not asked to do much, and she doesn't. Cyborg, like I already talked about that. Like, Ray Fisher's a great cyborg. Great cyborg. Not incredibly well written, not incredibly well fleshed out. Far better in the Snyder Cut, but I mean, still, whatever. Most of the I love Amy Adams as Lois. I thought she's a great Lois. I'm a little offended that Diane Lane is old enough to be Ma Kent. Like, that makes me feel old as fuck, but I mean, it is what it is. But like most of the cast, like I agree, most of the cast was really well done. I have a hard time with Jeremy Irons, period, and like full stop.
Interesting.
He sucks me out of the role, any role he plays. Like, you're not a real person. You are a stage actor playing at Hollywood.
Oh,
so
spicy.
Shots fired at the Aragon movie that everybody. Oh wait.
Oh my god.
I have so many things to say about Star Wars / Aragon. I can go for hours on that. I feel like I've rambled enough, but I mean, like I have very strong feelings about this film, and I wish I didn't, because I want to not care, and I do. I want to have been like, I'm not even gonna watch it, whatever.
Yeah,
but I did. I watched a lot of it, a lot. Took a very long time. It's an Injustice movie. It's not a Justice League movie, and we're never gonna get a Justice League movie. Like, let's just stand up and face it right now. Like, it's not happening, and maybe it's not meant to happen. I know I'm always the bad guy with this, but I'm not a big fan of adapting comics. I don't think they're meant to be adapted. I think Venom looks dumb in real life. I think he looks awesome on a page. This just is what it is. People don't run around wearing primary colors and spandex for a reason. Like, it's not a medium that was ever designed to work outside of itself. So when it does work, it's like, okay, well, you got one. That's awesome. Very good. But more often than not, they're going to fail just because they have to fail, because it's not meant for it. So I don't think we'll ever get a good Justice League movie, like a Justice League movie that I feel is good in the live action. I think they've blown too many opportunities. I just don't see anybody sticking around long enough to find it.
Here's the problem with the template that we have now at Warner Brothers is from its very inception of this DCEU, they botched the execution from the start. And this goes beyond simple adaptation and, I don't like Man of Steel, I don't like this or that or whatever. They didn't take the time to grow it and to do the homework and to set these characters up to make me care about them. Because now you get to Justice League, regardless of which cut you're talking about, okay? And you've got to introduce all of these characters and give us some semblance of backstory for them and try to give them some sort of a narrative arc to make me care about them. And it's asking too much of one movie. They spend over 2 hours of a 4-hour movie just setting up all of these people, really, before they even get in the same room together. That's interminable. We should have, all of that football stuff with Cyborg, that should have been his origin movie. And it should have been in real life, not on a damn green screen, which I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to care about Barry Allen caring about Iris West, and I don't. Snyder takes the shortcut of storytelling and plays off the assumption that we as viewers know who Barry Allen and Iris West are, what their relationship is with each other, so he can have their meet cute there with hot dogs in slow motion, and we will get it without having actually done the work of making us care. You see? And that like Justice League is just rife with that stuff. I don't care about these characters. The reason the Avengers work as a movie is because every one of the main characters had been set up prior to. And now it's time to get all the action figures together and watch them run around and punch CGI aliens. And it was so cool and so well done. And the fact that it was so cool and so well done is why some dumbass at Warner Brothers thought it would be a great idea, despite their differentiation of styles, to bring the director of Avengers, Joss Whedon, to finish the theatrical cut of Justice League. That was a stupid idea. That was the dumbest idea ever. That's like saying Johnny Cash is really good and Slayer is also really good. Let's put them on the stage together. Like, this doesn't work.
I would go to that. I'm just saying.
I would, but you know what I'm saying. So just from the start, you have a weak foundation for this movie. To your point, Cody, Henry Cavill looks like Superman, except that he never smiles. There's no warmth to him. There's no saving kittens from trees. And I get that Zack Snyder's not that guy, but he didn't even try to make the effort to make him Superman-esque. It was just, here's my Jesus Christ pose. I glower. Grimdark. Yeah. And come on, dude. Do something. Do something better. Anything. Like, have you ever read a Superman comic? And he obviously hasn't. He also hasn't obviously read a Batman comic.
He might have read Justice.
I mean, he's notorious for having stacks of comics in his desk, and like even people who don't like
a bunch of Youngblood comics from the 90s.
Did you read them? Like comics back here that I have, but I didn't read.
The dude fundamentally does not understand DC. Now, I grant you, he understands Injustice, and everything is grimdark and leaden with melodrama. Every single thing in this movie is slow and melodramatic. Like, what is that singing crap when Aquaman is leaving the shore? Why is that there? Why is it going on for 3 minutes? Why is a mop dropping on the floor slow and leaden and boom? When every moment is dramatic, no moment is dramatic. And that's the whole thing, is he throws so much pretentiousness into every little thing he does. And it just means you have 4 hours of ego and pretension. And that's not even getting into the crap CGI. Darkseid looked terrible. Desaad looked like a CGI blob of crap. Steppenwolf looked better. Still looked bad. Like, there's no there. When you have everything, when everything's fake, the environment, the characters, you can just tell that Ben Affleck or Gal Gadot is interacting with a tennis ball on a string half the time. And to me, that just means I basically watched 4 hours of a really, really expensive video game cutscene. That's how much soul is in it. And in fact, I've played video games, or my son has told me about video games that have more soul. I won't lie. I don't play video games very much that aren't 30 years old. But the point is, the whole thing doesn't feel organic. It doesn't feel real. It feels manufactured, like I'm watching a music video with really high design qualities. And I realize that for some people that works. Some people love that aesthetic. Some people love the Star Wars prequels. I mean, I just don't. So I could probably bitch some more about how Martian Manhunter does absolutely nothing. Like, he's just there.
I forgot he was in it. Until you said that. I forgot that he was even in it.
That's the first.
At least they gave it to us.
Oh yeah, they did with the with the Justice League pre-release comic that came out the day before. He's like right there on the cover. So that was lame.
I feel like I don't even have time to address the negatives because of how many things I want to address in y'all's negatives.
No, that's what we're here to do.
Because, and I preface the whole show along with what Matt said, because the discussion always tends to turn to, X doesn't understand this. This is not what the character should be. This is not, what it should have been. And that's goes more towards the idea that, if you like the Snyder Cut, that doesn't mean that people like Matt and Cody here are wrong for thinking that this is not the right version of Superman. And it's the same thing for what they're saying, because it didn't click with them. That doesn't mean that you're wrong and that you have no fundamental understanding of the DC universe or these characters because you enjoy them, because you do, and it's valid. And it's not something that disintegrates what these characters bring to both pop culture and the comics medium both. it's something that elevates it, because these characters are adaptable and they are universal in a language that is more than what Golden Age comics in the 40s brought to the table. And I think we're seeing that evolution, and I think it's harder for people to grasp. But negatives. One more thing. The storytelling that brought us to the Justice League, and Man of Steel is about parents, Batman v Superman is about friendship, and Justice League is about family. And when you approach the Snyder Cut as a unification of family and bringing them together, it really clicks on that level. And the storytelling and how it unfolds in those dynamics makes a lot more sense, rather than the Marvel method of, here's a throwaway story that is basically a nothing movie of an hour and a half. And now here's a team up story. Looking at you, Ant-Man. I love Ant-Man, but it's a nothing movie. And then there's it's a great movie, but it's a nothing movie. And then you get 3 or 4 of those, and then here's a team up. And now we're going to go back to that formula. This is a totally different approach to storytelling, and one feeds into the other in a way that Marvel really hasn't touched on that much. All that being said, the ultimate negative, is that this is not an Injustice movie. It should have been. And it's the same complaint that we had with Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey. It should have just been a Harley Quinn movie. And you don't have to do anything to the movie to change that, other than the one title that you see in the marketing and the branding. You just call it Harley Quinn. I guarantee the backlash that you saw on Twitter and on social media isn't there nearly as bad. And I think that's the case here, because it's a different version of what you would expect from the Justice League. This is not the New Frontier Justice League. It's just
the Justice
not.
League that executes a defeated foe.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a totally different vision. And that's why when you see in social media threads of people talking like Batman doesn't use guns, and you can guarantee there's that Frank Miller panel of Batman holding a gun, it always comes up in that, because there is a version for you. If you like that type of character and what those characters bring to the table in terms of storytelling, it exists for you. But it's not for the people who think Wonder Woman shouldn't behead a defeated villain. Wonder Woman was a badass warrior. Steppenwolf murdered the Amazons and did a lot of terrible, evil shit. And Darkseid was right in front of them. Behead him, send a message. Badass Wonder Woman. But
can I interject something there real fast? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
I appreciate that a Wonder Woman would behead this foe. I'm fine with that if that was consistent with the rest of the DCEU. So when you backtrack to Woman 84, when she doesn't kill Max Lord, in a moment where she should have killed Max Lord, it would jive with the comic universe that we have constructed for 80 years, and she didn't do it. Then when she does this to Steppenwolf, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yes. And that's not to say she shouldn't have killed Steppenwolf. It's to say that she should have killed in Wonder Woman 84. But it comes out as a negative, right? Because there's that lack of consistency. Even though, like, I can find that agreement with what I saw in the Snyder Cut, I didn't like Wonder Woman as much because of those moves, and that's removed from Snyder's vision. And I think that we're building on we're basing these films and these characters on the building blocks of Snyder's vision, which we can see where it's going, and it's dark as hell. And I think that Warner Bros., you can see it in the Joss Whedon cut, what they're trying to inject so many jokes. How much of that additional filming that Joss Whedon did went into just putting in stupid jokes that are ridiculous? At least in 4.5 hours, there's maybe like 3, like the hot dog one from the Snyder cut. But it's like every 3 minutes in the Joss Whedon cut, there's some stupid joke. And
that's Warner Brothers trying to make their product look more like a Marvel movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Tired of getting trounced critically.
Maybe even more than that. Like, it's also part of Warner Brothers trying to soften the edges on this very dark vision, because there is a fair amount of pushback. As much pushback as there is for, as much support as there is, there's as much pushback, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, if we can soften the edges, maybe we can, except for it's so dark that you can't soften the edges effectively. You have to go too far into camp to even try. And that's where the Whedon cut ultimately fails.
Yeah, because, I mean, you can't bring in Joss Whedon, Jeff Johns, and Danny Elfman and expect to repackage a Zack Snyder film movie as something that's all upbeat and lighthearted. It doesn't work. It comes out as a Frankenstein, and that's what we got.
That's totally all right. Totally.
But, getting back to the Snyder Cut and some of the negatives, I really think the biggest one is how it was packaged as a Justice League movie. And what scares me the most is where it was headed. I love the nightmare scene a lot because it's so indicative of injustice. And we got some of that, like just a little taste of it from Lois opening up the drawer and you see a pregnancy test. I can see the first page of Injustice of Batman or Superman pacing back and forth, like already planning out the entire life of their baby, like where he's going to high school, all this stuff. Like I can see that happen. And I want Justice League 2 to pick up right there. But that's not what's happening. Snyder has already told us kind of what's going on with what he would have planned to do. And it makes sense for what you see in the Snyder Cut. And it kind of highlights them as some of the negatives because some of the relationships that's happening with Batman and everything are not going where you think it is. And it's not going the injustice route. But I think that eventually, in hindsight, put some of these things in as a negative for me, where I thought a lot of these character moments did really well. I thought, like Cody said, the jokes, even in the Snyder Cut, I don't get it. the hot dog thing, why? I totally understand that. The Iris not being named, I get that. I mean, you have the time. Warner Bros. Let you do whatever you want with this. Like, put that in. I think that's a significant moment, but the benefits far outweigh the negatives for me. And I think that going through it, most of the negatives are coming from outside influences and those forces because it got packaged in a way that it probably shouldn't have. And the situation that brought it about was a tragic situation. And we're talking about a situation that couldn't have happened before. And maybe had a little bit too much freedom. 4 hours, a Justice League handle, sort of like Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey. You can handle Harley Quinn, but the Birds of Prey tag maybe didn't sit so well because it doesn't match that creative vision. And I think as important as it was for us to get this creative vision of Zack Snyder doing Justice League, maybe it was that creative vision that was also part of the issue because it doesn't sync up as well as what you would hope for this grand DC universe. And I think it's a bit tragic that we're not going to get a continuation of the Snyderverse, but also in what world would you get the resources and freedom to continue what the direction of this Justice League is? And I think that's where it kind of ultimately falls flat because I love the Martian Manhunter inclusion, but where's that going?
It's okay. So let me just real quick speak to because obviously the end of it is setting up for a sequel that's almost certainly never going to happen. And that in and of itself, I was fine with, right? But his initial reveal doesn't make any sense at all. And it just completely kills any emotional resonance that the Lois and Martha scene had.
Yeah.
Like,
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of those character moments.
Me, it was already struggling to figure out what to do with Lois Lane other than, Lois is the key. Well, she's a very ill-defined key because she doesn't do anything but mope around for 2/3 of the movie. And I may get it. She's grieving, but at the same time, give her something else to do. My God. I mean, The movie goes like a whole hour without her even in it or being mentioned or anything, right?
That's true.
That sucks. Don't sideline Amy Adams. She's a great actress.
And I love that point because that is one of the shortcomings of the movie is that it kind of wasn't long enough, as ridiculous as that is to say. I say that to say that it sets up more than it answers in a movie that's really supposed to round out a trilogy for Zack Snyder that can be more finalized. It ends on a massive cliffhanger. It spends a lot of its time setting up future plot lines and threads that we're never going to get to explore. And it's almost a tease in that way. And that kind of makes me not like it as much because I'm always going to have that feeling like what could have been with this. But it's also, it's a disservice to the actual story. And I think it ties into what Cody talked about, that it's not really the story you want. You want to see Justice League taking on Darkseid, and he just kind of hangs out behind a portal most of the time. And that kind of sucks, right? Like you want to see like this version of the Justice League along with the Green Lanterns that kind of got sidelined again, along with Martian Manhunter. You want to see them take on Darkseid. It's the Justice League's first live action film. You got to go all out, right? Now you get Steppenwolf's kind of like little journey about maybe betraying.
Yeah, that thing with his family. That was weird, but at the same time, it wasn't in the theatrical cut.
No, it added more depth to that character, but it also made it more of a
sure, but it was at least in it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's trying to redeem himself for a past mistake in Darkseid's eyes. Okay, I can work with that, but it's just not enough.
Yeah.
To kind of circle back to something that Matt said earlier with the notion that, okay, Marvel's already got this machine rolling, and now DC has to kind of come in and play catch up. Like, we're already behind. The superhero craze is fully underway, and now we've got to kind of smash things through. Lucas, once again, I'm sitting there watching it with him, and Desaad shows up, and Lucas is basically a comic book casual. He had his moment in the 90s like we all had, but isn't particularly well versed in much, and less so in DC than Marvel. So he sees this character and he goes, is that like supposed to be like the other from Avengers?
Oh.
And there was that brilliant moment where it's like, man, if you only knew how right and wrong you are at the same time.
Right?
Because they got there first. They already put their flag in the hooded assistant to the big Rocky guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, just something to consider and something to think about there is that whether or not the Marvel films are great cinema could certainly be debated. They're mostly enjoyable popcorn film. Not a whole lot of them are like spectacular narratively done or even necessarily CGI done. Some of them have some bad CGI. Here nor there, they set a precedent that I believe many of us expected DC to at least attempt to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that precedent, whether it's unfair to DC or not, DC didn't follow it. And for a lot of people, it didn't work. And for a lot more people, the Marvel precedent did work.
Yeah. And I don't think that means that the Marvel formula would have been directly applicable to what we saw in DC. Because I think that some of the strengths that I find in the Snyder Cut is that they treat these characters like gods among men. And I think that's something that Marvel doesn't really do so well. And I think that plays into what I favored with this, but it also lends itself to that grimdark adaptation that people are like, this is just not my Justice League team. And it's a pros and cons. And we saw that, eventually studio mandates outweighed Snyder's vision of this darker Justice League. I mean, who really, like, in the comparison of just Superman's outfit, it's kind of ballsy to do the first Justice League movie on live screen and not have Superman in his iconic red and blue outfit. I mean, you're putting him in a black suit.
Did you guys notice, though, that when he's in all black, he's ostensibly the good guy, but then for the epilogue, when he's gone to the dark side, that's when he's in a traditional costume? That was just weird, right?
The whole thing was dark that I actually didn't even notice that it was an all-black costume.
That's because the whole movie was so dark.
I'm also colorblind, but the whole thing was so dark. I didn't even notice it was the black costume, to be perfectly honest with you. That's a first heard here, but it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is kind of a nifty little nod to the Return of Superman as he's wearing that all black costume. Okay, fair, cool.
Yeah. And it's part of that thing where Snyder's vision is so important to keep intact, but it also kind of hinders it because it's not what you want it to be. And I think, if the first Justice League movie is this iconic vision of Justice League taking on the ultimate big bad and Darkseid, you've got a lot more positivity behind it. But it's like the start of something that could have been. And there's so much of a fight to get the start of something that we're not going to finish. And that to me is the ultimate negative. It's just, it's going to be forever in history is something that, had potential. We never really know where it got to go, but at least we got this because we saw what happened before with Joss Whedon's cut. And it's an unprecedented movie and a moment in comic storytelling that is just intrinsically ingrained now in pop culture. There's no way this movie does not have some type of impact on what fandom can bring to the production of projects. And I think we're going to see that for good or bad. I wasn't necessarily on board with the Sonic thing because it felt like bullying. But like I said in chat when we were talking about it, I don't agree with being able to bully these studios and like have your way with them to get what you want out of the product. But I liked both the Sonic movie and the Snyder Cut. That's a weird discussion. And I think that's something that it doesn't come up a lot because we've never done this before. So that's where a lot of our discussion is. And good or bad, I just hate that it kind of ends here.
I don't. Kill it with fire, put it to bed.
I do think it's interesting. Like, I don't know if Warner Brothers releases like views data. Like, Netflix doesn't. We have no idea how many people watched anything on Netflix. I don't know if HBO Max releases that information, but I've got to think that, enough people have watched it to have made it worth Warner Brothers' investment. So whether we like it or not, there is something there that is probably, we'll probably see play out in different and evolving ways going forward. Having said that, though, it's interesting to me that after the original theatrical cut of Justice League, things get a lot brighter in the DCEU. You got Wonder Woman. You've got the very, very candy-colored Aquaman movie. You've got, I mean, visually speaking, it's a bright, like, very good-looking movie. Very, very high contrast to what had come before. You've got Shazam. Hell yeah. I mean, Birds of Prey. It's bright. It pops off the screen. So it kind of feels to me like this is sort of the true epilogue to that stage of the DCEU. And now that it's happened, it's done, they're free, more or less, so to speak, to move forward with other visions of what DC should look like. Because I think the big problem, too, in hindsight, was that they tied what they wanted the DCEU to be to one director. Rather than have a lot of different voices in the room directorially. So
it's not just the one director, though. The problem is they don't have a producer like Feige that is willing to work with people and unify everything. So you put it in the hands of the director of a single line, just basically the Superman through, I guess, Justice League line, like this core line, but on the outliers, then you've got other things happening. And there's nobody there saying, "Oh, come on, no, hang on, wait." Do that different.
Yeah,
that doesn't work.
Yeah, there's nobody there telling Zack Snyder no.
Yeah, but it's
Mark
almost
Steve is a bad idea.
There's a creative approach that's so different because there's a lot of skepticism about how much freedom Marvel allows the directors, which is where you can kind of like pull random people and they're going to do good because there's a Marvel formula, there's a team behind it. And there's even some stuff like I've seen, I don't know how, factual or true a lot of the previs stuff is that Marvel does. And that I know James Gunn talked about how he was hands-on in a lot of the pre-visuals for Guardians of the Galaxy, but there are some in like Captain Marvel and stuff where people are thinking maybe not so much. But I think that there are consequences to giving the reins of the DC universe to Zack Snyder and saying
any one director.
Yeah. Where you want to promote so much creative freedom, you also want to maintain that brand consistency.
Yeah.
And whenever somebody has such a unique vision like Zack Snyder, I mean, who out there is doing work like Snyder? And you give somebody like that, somebody who's so creatively unique and independent, the reins to do almost whatever they want for a good few movies. Yeah. And then they start realizing maybe we should have done the Feige approach where there's a bit more strict parameters and these movies can be a bit more on rails because we need to be able to control box office performance. I think that ultimately led to what we see now in Marvel doing so well with their movies and making so much money. And then Zack Snyder having such a powerful fandom base behind him that is not as big, but
they're very
determined. Yeah, they're adamant, they're determined, and they're loyal and loving of this work in a way that I just haven't seen for Marvel's movies. Marvel's movies, everybody loves them. They're fun. You have some popcorn with it. You move on about your day. People don't do that with the Snyder Cut. People don't do that with Zack Snyder's work. I mean, we're still here, we're still talking about it. And I think that speaks volumes to the creative approach and what it
about
led.
it for the very opposite reasons that people are talking about Marvel movies. Like, I don't agree with you that people watch a Marvel movie and then just forget about it. I mean, there's a reason that they're just continuing to chug along and make Black Panther and get a chance to make, a movie about a tree and a raccoon become everybody's favorites. I mean, it's because there's real quality work there that gets both fans and non-fans on board. I mean, little kids dress up as Rocket Raccoon for Halloween. I mean, and yes, people have been dressing up as Superman for Halloween for decades, but apples and oranges.
Not really the same.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about the Snyder Cut because of its very divisive nature, not because of its inherent and the vast cultural imprint that it's had. I mean, for better or worse, the huge event style widescreen storytelling that Marvel more or less perfected at this point as a studio has changed Hollywood, and DC is tried to do something different and they just haven't. They're struggling to play catch up, even when they make a good movie like Shazam that is really good. It just still is in that shadow because Marvel is just the Colossus right now.
And Shazam played by Marvel's rules, I feel like. And that's why it wasn't really my favorite. It did. And what you don't have that with the Snyder Cut and with what Zack Snyder did. Marvel has mass mainstream appeal in a way that kids and their families can go and love it and have fun with it. And of course, they're going to dress up as Rocket and Raccoon, but nobody's having theological debates about Guardians of the Galaxy like they're having with what Zack Snyder's done with his characters.
But people are enjoying. Who's having a theological debate about the Snyder Cut? Hold on.
I have theological debates about damn near everything in the world, and I've never had it. The only theological debate I've had about Snyder's shit is how many times did Clark say he's 33 years old? Three times? Got it. Okay, he's 33.
Well, yeah, that's
got it.
I'm not like I understand because it's come up in a few of y'all's complaints that they lend too much into the crucifixion of Jesus with the pose that Superman does a lot. But I say that to point out that there's a level of depth in Snyder's work that is just not there in Marvel's work, and that's maybe it comes at a sacrifice of entertainment appeal, but I think that it narrowed the audience for Justice League in a way that Warner Bros. Just couldn't afford.
Okay, but what do you mean? Can you give me an example? Because I really want to have this talk, but I don't quite follow where you're coming from.
An example of
the deeper themes and resonance that you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's a lot of the character dynamics between how you're explored Bruce's relationship with his parents. Superman being the beacon of humanity and savior of humanity. I think that the themes like I touched on with an evolution of a familial approach between this being about parents and the loss of parents, and then about friendship that you see in Batman v Superman, and then about a family coming together in Justice League, and that evolution of storytelling you don't find in the Marvel universe because there is no inherent emotional string that's tying these movies together to give them connective tissue on an emotional in-depth level. They're kind of one shots
do in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's exactly the same thing as what you're saying, except for I see it in Guardians of the Galaxy and I don't see it in the Snyderverse. Like, you can say that the BVS was about friendship, but those weren't friends. Those were people that needed each other at a certain moment, and then they all went their separate ways, never to be seen again. Like, it's decades before, oh shit, now I need you again. So
and that's the thing about Marvel is it's easy to point to Guardians of the Galaxy, but can you point to the context that those movies are set in the greater universe, and that you can follow that line of emotional depth? You can't really do that like you can in Marvel.
Endgame, like, it's very clear, like, especially with Guardians of the Galaxy, that family that started off as a bunch of prisoners that were just thrown together, like, that development through Nebula coming on board and becoming sisters with
it's organic.
Like, it's organic and it works, and it's continued throughout like 5 films, and presumably we'll get another film of Thor in the Asgardians of the universe. Like this feels like it's a very developing thing, where the Snyderverse stuff, these development of relationships feel static. Like if they just all went their separate ways at the end of Justice League, would I be surprised? No. Aquaman goes back and does his thing. Diana goes off and does her thing. Victor didn't want to be there in the first place, and he still didn't want to be there. Like, he didn't want to be there in the final.
To me, in my opinion, there's just not the chemistry between the actors that you see in any Marvel movie, even the weakest ones. Like, I mean, I hate, I'll catch shit for this, I'm sure, from somebody, but Captain Marvel is one of the weaker Marvel movies, but I still felt more of an emotional tether to it than I have any of the Zack Snyder movies.
Yeah.
And it's because I feel that because Snyder focuses so much on the craft aspect of it, that he tends to lose the human aspect of his movies. And so when he does have to do something like, have a moment of emotional realization between Superman and Batman, where it's like, oh, we are alike, which was his intent, we wind up with the Martha scene.
I think one of the most significant scenes for me that highlights that point is, for one, Marvel knows they're dealing with humanistic characters that have relatable issues and problems, and that's kind of where Marvel has historically found their niche. Sure. And DC is dealing with gods among men, and it's hard for men to relate to gods. And I think that moment was never more clear than when Wonder Woman kneels down to the little girl and she's like, "Can I be like you one day?" And she gives this awesome explanation, of why, what you can do and how you can be a hero. When really, no.
That was a good moment.
But like, Wonder Woman's a god, and she's presented in her story and her character in this vision of the character is done in a way that makes that scene feel weird. And I think that because they're so entrenched in this gods among men that's epic, and that's not what you feel from Marvel, that it makes those moments a little weaker. And I think, as strong as I think it does, or as strong of things as I think it does for Wonder Woman, it does inhibit that inherent feeling of superheroes and the humanistic, relatable traits that you want from them. But I think DC should treat their heroes as gods among men, and that fits with the DC universe, and that fits with my understanding of these characters in a way that you don't really see all that often in adaptions.
But here's the thing, and I'm going to use Superman in this example, is the world might see Superman as a god, but he's a farm boy from Kansas. And where the wires seem to get crossed is that Zack Snyder seems to just believe that, yes, he is a god amongst men. Why wouldn't he be? He's mightier than them, without any of that humanity that Clark Kent has. And, whereas, Batman is ultimately a little boy that never got over the death of his parents and decided to punch people in the head dressed up like a bat for effect. He's ultimately that little boy inside. And that's not what Snyder sees. He sees the outside, the exterior only, the surface level Batman, the surface level Superman. And for the characters that are somewhat less iconic in that way, Aquaman, Cyborg, and the Flash.
The same applies.
It does, but I think to a lesser degree, because
Aquaman is a man without a nation.
On a comparative level, they're more relatable than Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman in that movie.
In that movie, yes, but I feel like, for just continuing that metaphor of this failure to capture the human aspects of these gods, like Aquaman is a royal without a nation. Nobody in his nation respects him. People on the surface think he's a freak. Like, nobody wants him, even though he's of royal blood. He's powerful. He's strong and efficient and has all these great things going for her. Diana is lost contact with her home. For thousands and thousands of years, she never left her home, and now she can't get back. So what does she do instead? She turns her compassion outward to humanity.
Yeah.
Instead of spending the rest of her life just trying to figure out a way to get back, she spends her time trying to figure out how to connect with humanity. Barry cannot connect with humanity because he can't get out of his own head. Like, Barry lives in his head trying to solve the murder of his mom, free his dad, so he's not an orphan anymore. Essentially the same as Bruce, except he has a chance of doing it where Bruce has no hope of it. So, I mean, you look at all these characters and they're all, like, we talk about these flaws that Marvel built into their characters in the Golden Age of Marvel in 1961 and all that. But we fail to recognize the ways that DC also did that, but a little bit cleaner. Marvel's a little bit messier and a little bit more chaotic. DC has a little bit more order to their chaos. But I mean, these are very similar characters that, we create this false polemic between them. Like, it's DC or Marvel. Well, it's DC and Marvel. Like, this is the core of the American superhero mythology. And, then you get to complicate it and muddy it up with like Wildstorm and Image and stuff like that later. But really, this is the heart. And that's why, when companies go under, they snatch them up. Eclipse goes under, Marvel buys it. Fawcett gets driven under. I mean, it's a little shady business practice, but whatever. DC brings them into the fold. So, I mean, like, they are, right? DC and Marvel is.
Dark Side reference if y'all didn't catch it.
I didn't mean to take the floor from you, Matt.
No. I think that's fair. Although your Dark Side reference did just bring up something that just really bugged me, and this is total nerd crap, but I'll freely say it. Darkseid's talking about he lost the anti-life equation, but you can't lose an equation. He has to solve the anti-life equation. Damn it.
Words matter to those little things.
It bugs me.
Okay, if I can talk about a little thing too. In Joss Whedon's cut, you have a terrible version of Superman saving those people with her bracelets or whatever, or her gauntlets. And he just goes to shooting with his gun. And then we found out in the Snyder one, I was talking with my wife about it, and she was able to kind of pinpoint there's a level of, I guess, lethality or menace that you don't capture in such a significantly small moment of him firing one shot and he realizes she stops it. So he flips his switch into what people call the fun mode that's fully automatic. And then he just starts unloading all these people because he's like, this will be quicker. But you don't get that moment in the Joss Whedon cut. You get him firing one shot and then just spraying. And I think that there's a level of nuance that Zack Snyder brought to even the smallest, seemingly insignificant moments that helped build what those characters were a reflection of or were mirroring, and that it empowered Wonder Woman in a way that Joss Whedon just fell flat on, and making them just be some generic superhero. I think as a small scene, I was like, nobody's going to really notice that. But it was so significant to me to be like, why would you cut that out when it added so much depth into the trauma that these people were experiencing?
And Zack Snyder also didn't feel compelled to film the Flash falling into Diana's boobs. So
there were rumors that Gal refused to. I don't know how true it is. Like I said, it comes up a lot in social media that she refused to film that scene, and they put a body double in. Which now that, given what we know about the production of the movie following Zack Snyder's exit, I'm not that surprised.
Unfortunately. So at the end of the day, we've been going well over an hour now. I mean, no matter what we say, you're either going to like this movie or not. I don't think there's going to be any in between on this. I mean, there's just not going to be a casual Snyder Cut fan out there. It's here. It exists. It's going to have a cultural imprint because of its own origin story. And I think that in and of itself is something that will be very interesting to follow the evolution of, like, in the next few years. Like, how, like you were saying, Nick, how much of a voice is fandom going to be able to have and exercise in these things now? I mean, did Was that the case, or was Warner Brothers doing a mea culpa because the movie underperformed in the box office?
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, it's tough to know because restore the Snyderverse has already been trending on Twitter. I mean, they're already saying we'll revert to the old ways, bring out the hashtags, and they don't want to stop it. Just release the Snyder Cut. It's restore the Snyderverse now. And I think that's the next stage in this type of power that has gone to fandom's head to some degree. And there's going to be some weird things that happen, I think, because of it, whether good or bad. It's just part of it now.
Yeah, most definitely. I can hope that if something like this were to ever happen again, it would occur without the more toxic aspects that some of the Snyder Cut fandom brought to the table.
Yeah. And also not born of tragedy like the loss of Autumn.
Somebody was actually showing on social media earlier the scene where Bruce is driving with Barry in that really sleek silver car. There's a big billboard with a suicide prevention hotline number on it. And I did not catch that the first time, but that I'm really, really grateful to Zach for putting that in there.
Yeah.
So, well, guys, final thoughts. So I know we don't typically rank things on scales, but if you had to do it, what would you rate this movie 0 to 10?
I don't want to go first.
I give it a 6. And that's on my sliding scale of, like, if you're below a 5, I didn't make it through. Okay. I made it through. So it's at least a 5. I give it a 6. I would give a student a 60 on this paper. If this was a creative project that they handed into me, it's like, okay, but I'm going to let you try again. And we can get you up a letter grade. But for now, like, it's in the D range for me.
Okay. Nick?
Which is better. It's improvement.
Yeah, I feel like letter grades are easier to talk about, and I guess that's just
that's fine. Whichever. I mean, it's not like we're out there.
Yeah, and they do kind of lend themselves into the 0 to 100 range, I feel like. But I feel like I would give this a B+ or maybe an A-. I feel like it's a upper echelon DC movie that is on par with what we saw at Wonder Woman. May not be as good as Wonder Woman, but it turned a joke of a movie that I would have given like a 3 or a 4 in Joss Whedon's cut into something that easily doubled that score over an 8.5.
Okay. So I feel like the theatrical cut for me was maybe about a 4.5. 5.5, 6-ish, right in there for me. So yeah, I mean, there's just too much. Like, and I didn't take notes. I was starting to take notes. I was like, no, I don't want our podcast to go for 3 hours while I just bitch about things. So I'm trying to speak about broad generalities, but yeah, it's just not for me. I get it. If you like it, if it's your, and part of that is the aesthetic. I just don't respond to that hyper CGI style well at all. That's just me. Okay. So I taking that into account too, but there's some major storytelling flaws with it, characterization issues that I just cannot overcome. So yeah, 5.5 is probably about where I'm at. But that's up from the theatrical cut, so
that's exactly right. It's improvement. You've done better.
It is. It's at least totally consistent.
And if you like it, whoever is out there, Nick among them, if you like it, that's awesome. Yeah. So help me God, if you tell me I don't like it because I don't understand it and we're in person, I'm going to punch you in the face. If we're not
I don't
in person,
like
I'm probably just going to block you because that is smiggering bullshit.
Yeah, I don't like that.
You're not winning any logical arguments with that.
No, it's gatekeeping, and that's so prevalent in fandom, and I've seen it come up a lot around the Snyder Cut, and I'm glad we've been able to touch on it a couple of times, because just because you like these characters does not mean that people who didn't like the Snyder Cut have no idea about the DC universe and have no understanding. And just because you didn't like it doesn't mean these people have no understanding of the DC universe. That is gatekeeping. It's just not for you, and that's okay. And it's okay that it's for you too. just ridiculous. I have feelings about that. I will go on for another hour on that one because
Bottom line, don't be a gatekeeper. Like something, don't like something. Don't take it away from somebody else's experience, though. End of story. I mean, really, that's what it amounts to. I mean, if you want to have an articulate discussion like we did, with some occasional jocularity thrown into the mix, that's fine. But we're professionals. We can do this sort of thing. So, but guys, thank you so much for this very, very thoughtful conversation. For all of you that are listening, we thank you for listening to our sponsors, Frankie's Comics, Carson's Corner, and Lemon Juice Comics. Thank you to you all. The Comic Watcher Show is part of the comic-watch.com family. You should definitely check out some of our sister shows, Mutant Watch, Valiant Watch, and Anime Watch, all of which are available on where finer podcasts can be found, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, and all that good stuff. So until next time, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. Read something, support your local comic shop, and above all else, be kind to each other. Thank you and good night.